400 plus indicators to measure and assess what we're doing. Theoretically, we say that the SDGs are an integrated whole. Many of the goals are tied to each other. They are almost indivisible. Having said that, we do need to prioritize. Goal number 14 is actually related to oceans, so perhaps that is less salient to us, even though the water that flows from the Himalayas ultimately ends up in the Bay of Bengal, or the planetary movements, the monsoon cycles, etc., will end up affecting our economic and social calendars. One can prioritize. But just to run through the SDGs, actually from the uninitiated, SDG 1 is about eliminating poverty, very relevant to us. SDG 2 is about eliminating hunger, very relevant to us. So eliminating, not just staying at around 10%, 12%, but just eliminating it by 2030. Goal 3 is on quality health. Goal 4 is on quality education. Goal 5 is on gender equity. Goal 6 on universal access to water and sanitation. Goal 7 is on universal access to clean and modern forms of energy, 100% access to visually. Goal 8 is on modern economic growth, industrialization, etc. Goal 9 is on innovation and infrastructure. Goal 10 is on reducing inequality. Goal 11 is on cities and settlements, urbanization. Goal 12 is on consumption, responsible consumption. Goal 13 is on climate change. Goal 14 is on protecting oceans. Goal 15 is on conservation, etc. The forest, life on land, as we say. Goal 16 is on inclusive institutions, and Goal 17 is international partnerships. Now, if you ask me to prioritize and rank those, I would say all of them are equally important. But the resources are limited, and that's where we need to choose. So if you really put a gun to my head and say choose one, I would probably go with Goal 8, economic growth. Right? Until we have that going, a lot of the other social, environmental, economic targets will be unmet. $4,000 is the upper ambition, and this is a narrative that I often use to discredit or to make it more realistic. This other narrative that many of our politicians use, Singapore banai dinchu, Switzerland banai dinchu, it's impossible. The best we will be able to do over the next 12 to 15 years, even if we pull off a miracle in terms of economic investments, economic opportunities, Nepal suddenly turning into this entrepreneurial mecca, the best we will be able to achieve with 7 to 8% of annual economic growth rate, year after year after year, sustained over a period of at least 10 years, is what Sri Lanka is at today. Now, Sri Lanka is not quite an example for today, there was the economic crisis going, but there too, I make this distinction between development achievements accrued over 70 years. Literacy doesn't just evaporate. All the built asset is there. Just the temporary macroeconomic shocks, this sudden depletion of foreign exchange that they've had to grapple with, largely because of some bad governance, bad leaders for a certain period of time after the Tamil insurgency was crushed. That is a temporary phenomenon. Right? Already they've got $3 billion from the IMF and they're on the road to recovery. But the larger achievements that Sri Lanka has secured over the last 70 years in terms of all the 17 goals that I mentioned, literacy, gender equality, hunger, poverty, reducing inequality, etc., is there. And unless the economic transition prolongs, on which some of those goals might reverse, those achievements might reverse, that's really the aspiration that we have. If you go further afar, maybe Morocco levels of per capita income is something we should aspire for. So, चमत्कार नै गरे पनि 10-12 वर्षपछि पुग्ने भनेको आजको श्रीलङ्काको प्रति व्यक्ति आयको लेभल हो. So that makes us sober. That will make us realistic on what we can do. But even that is conditional on securing huge investments, both on the public front, both on the private front, etc. So I think that that Vastavik picture, what we can realistically pull off, is very helpful going forward. The second issue, I think the person who posed the question really misunderstood, fundamentally misunderstood what I was trying to say. The economic crisis, the macroeconomic picture can be disaggregated into the fiscal story, monetary story, external story, and the real story, which is about output, employment, jobs, etc., right? Decent jobs. Now on the fiscal front, there's something wonderful that the government of Nepal has done. So if you go to this website called fcgo.gov.np, Financial Controller General's Office, fcgo.gov.np, you can actually check for yourself, sitting here on your mobile phone, how much the state of Nepal raised in the revenues as of 5 p.m. yesterday, and how much it spent in the country. And it's all broken down into recurrent expenditures, capital expenditures, financing of infrastructure, etc. And even on the revenue front, how much through tax sources, how much through non-tax sources, how much of foreign grants that we raised. I didn't check it yesterday, but I did check the day before. We've spent around 8 kharab, which is about 800 billion rupees as of 5 p.m. the day before, roughly. And you know how much we've raised? 600. Already there's this gaping hole. The gap. We have to borrow from you. Your savings channeled through the banks. That's how the central bank raises part of that gap. The other gap, the part of the gap, is raised or borrowed from international sources. Right? So the story I'm trying to say is we've been on this spree, this grossly irresponsible spree, fiscal spree, spending here, there, all these largesse, especially on the political front, and ramping up the scale of recurrent expenditures, this fazul kharsa, to such an extent that our tax base will no longer be able to sustain it. And just on the social security front, there are 35 lakh Nepalis who receive every month an amount between 500 rupees per month all the way up to 4,000 rupees per month. 35 lakhs just receiving all that money. Right? Now, a lot of that is reserved, but there is this competitive populism at work where there's political parties are competing with each other to raise those allowances, etc. And that's an unsustainable path. Given that the economic growth that we need to enlarge and grow our tax base, we've made almost no progress on that front. Yet on the redistribution part, without having generated much wealth within the country, we're just spending in a very irresponsible manner. So that discipline has to be reintroduced. So that was the thrust of my point. But social protection is absolutely needed. It has to be means tested, it has to be well targeted, and it cannot be regressive in nature. You know, Chaudhary's father receiving 4,000 rupees per month, and some poor Dalit grandfather receiving the same amount in Dailek, right? And we should be more innovative in the way we conduct or we run our social protection programs. I actually see a lot of benefits if we invest in the first 1,000 days of childhood. A lot of the seeds of inequality are sowed during those first 1,000 days. The cognitive ability that our children develop dependent on the nourishment that they receive in those early years. So even very conservative development economists would argue that it is justified to spend as much as you can in the earlier days rather than in the later stages of life. And social protection plays an immense role in buffering against shocks, such as the one that you saw during COVID and other episodes of hardship. So the gentleman who posed the question, happy to talk to him separately, but don't conflate the larger macroeconomic story with this very niche issue of how we make social protection funds much more viable. On lower middle income country, it's about $3,800 per capita per. So we are at around 1,200. So the hisab 3 crore janta, per capita income 1,000 is a $30 billion economy, right? So what we are aiming for, if we stabilize our population, which seems to be the trend, is $3,500 per capita, inching towards that threshold between lower middle income and upper middle income country, multiplied by 3 crore janta is a $100 billion economy in today's prices. Right? You always have to account for inflation, etc. So in today's prices, a $100 billion economy, per capita $3,500. Everybody in this room obviously will earn much more than $3,500 per person per year, but on average that will be the case. And if we can achieve that, just that, from about $35 billion now to $100 billion in today's prices, it will be a miracle. Right? But what would it take to pull off that miracle? It's a lot of huge strides on the political, economic, social, governance, etc., while internalizing some of those threats and opportunities that I was talking about earlier. I do not intend to go back to the National Planning Commission. I think it has to be fundamentally revamped. I might even suggest that it be shut down and maybe restructure it in some other form. So maybe the Prime Minister's Economic Council or something like that. But the NPC in its current form that started 75 years ago has basically run out of steam. It's no longer relevant to the kind of economy that we see. The modes of production, the structure of the economy, agriculture, industry, services, everything has gone through a revolutionary transition. But my primary focus, if I am ever back in government, perhaps in a more executive role, would be to create an entrepreneurial climate, attract a lot of foreign direct investment, invest a lot in basic infrastructure to connect ourselves with each other, but also with our immediate neighbors. So air connectivity, road connectivity, maybe water connectivity, to get to reduce distance, time, etc., to make our economic engagements much more efficient. So the focus on infrastructure, both on the basis of domestic taxation that needs to rise, but also leveraging the concessional financing that will still be available to us leading up to 2030, but that will continue to shrink in size as we rise in our per capita incomes. So if we become a healthy middle-income country, a lower middle-income country, inching towards an upper middle-income threshold, a lot of the concessional resource that we have, 1% interest spread over 40 years, 8 years of initial grace period, etc. All that will go away as we rise. So infrastructure to power growth that is inclusive and sustainable, and to get us to that respectable level of middle income status. On hard and soft power, I think hard power is to manage the geopolitical rivalries as we are witnessing. The so-called Indo-Pacific alliance that is forming. The United States is quite aggressive these days in safeguarding its own interests. But China's re-emergence as a global power. Remember, I mentioned that as of 1770, way before 1820, China was the most powerful country on the account of its headcount. It just had too many people. Before the industrial process began, it was what each individual produced that mattered, that constituted the GDP. With the Industrial Revolution, you could produce much more, even if you had fewer people with the machines and the technological breakthroughs. That's why the great divergence happened between the Western countries and the Orient. Now, so the US, China, the rise of India as the fifth largest economy, slowly, eventually becoming the third largest economy, it will have implications. So that's the hard power. Manifest oftentimes through military means and strategic choices that they make. We've seen what's happening between India and China, India and Pakistan, these various alliances. Soft power is more about people-to-people ties, connections. It could be music, it could be cricket, it could be cinema, it could be just you getting on a plane and going to Phuket and learning to speak Bahasa, things like that. Right? So this is what deepens people-to-people connectivity. And oftentimes we've seen that intense soft power, intense exercise of soft power actually amplifies the opportunities that come through hard power, and it can minimize the threats that come through hard power. It is often said that no two countries have gone to war where there's a McDonald's present. Right? So the economic interests often trump the hard military choices that countries often make. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Wagle. We'd like to stay on stage.